All right, everyone, welcome back to the Therapist Confidential podcast. Today, I have the very good fortune of being joined by Dr. Lisa Forbes, one of my favorite humans in the world. And today we get to talk about play, play therapy, maybe even hear some about what play therapy looks like in action, which I'm looking forward to because I did a practicum in play therapy when I was a master's student, and I still don't think I know what play therapy is or even what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I'm looking forward to hearing about how this might actually look in practice. Lisa, welcome. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what's important in your world?
All right. Well, who I am, probably close to this work. I am an associate clinical professor at the University of Colorado, Denver, and I teach in the counseling program there. I am also a therapist and play therapist. And then in my academic work, I also research play in adult teaching and learning and also play in adulthood. And I created a global faculty network called Professors at Play that looks at playful pedagogy. So I say that because when I talk about either or, when I talk about play therapy and people know that I do playful pedagogy, or if I talk about playful pedagogy and then they know I do play therapy, they think they're the same thing. And it's not. It's just I'm obsessed with play. So they're a little bit different. They both believe in the power of play, but I'm just a play nerd, basically. And as a human, I'm a mom. I have 2 kids, and I pretend to be a soccer player each week.
Liar, liar. You were a great soccer player. You're underselling it. Tell them the truth.
I play in lazy Sunday adult leagues.
That is the truth now, but you were also a Division One collegiate soccer player. Since we're talking about play, I mean, that's kind of the height of one form of play. So you were quite a good soccer player. I mean, what did you make it to the Sweet 16 and D1 soccer at Cal State Fullerton? Yes.
Yes, that's true. That was a long time ago, though, Travis.
It- well, we're all getting older, Lisa. That's how it goes. But I actually think that's cool and relevant to this idea of play.
Um,
And, like, it's interesting because to me, this is just my opinion, the therapy world seems not very playful most of the time. And I guess that's true of academics too. We're like so damn serious. It's just, oh, we're serious about everything and philosophizing it. Hey, there's a place for that. I'm not saying it's bad, but boy, as a bunch, therapists, academics, we are not very playful. And here you are studying, literally, you've run studies on play. You have this whole faculty sort of listserv and group you've created around play. I mean, you have this whole conference in Colorado. I mean, it's not a conference. You call it Playposium that's coming up in June. I mean, pretty amazing all that you're doing around play, and yet the field doesn't seem to care much about play. So, could you begin just by telling us, like, why should we care about play at all?
well, I mean, I think we should care about play because it's really an innate drive. It's something that we all need to be well. I mean, there's a lot of research on the benefits of play and how we need it to thrive in our worlds and be more human. So, yeah, I think it's an innate drive that helps us have joy and connection and creativity and belonging. And, it helps us get up and moving and be active. So, I don't know. I feel like we really disadvantage ourselves by pushing play to the side. And I think sometimes people misunderstand play as like this childish, frivolous activity, which it can be. It can be that, but it's not only that. So I think when we think of play as just childish and pointless, of course, we're not going to bring it into our therapy rooms or our teaching and our professional lives. So play is also a mindset and it's also a philosophy, and play is also protest. So I think if you could understand more of the complexity to it, then I think people would be more likely to bring it in to their adult lives and then get the benefit from that.
Okay, you said a number of interesting things. So let me ask this first, because I'm guilty of this. So I'll admit this. I bet there are other people listening that are guilty of the same thing. But Lisa, I don't have time to play. I've got 2 kids, I've got 18 jobs, how am I supposed to find time to play?
Well, you just gotta make time for it, Travis. Is that a question?
Yes, because I'm hearing about the benefits of play, and we've discussed this before just about play, but then I feel like I'm in a world that creates a set of circumstances where I literally don't have time to play. And I'm wondering, sorry, this is therapy for me, everyone. How do I reconcile that? Because I'd like to play, but I feel like I'm in a world that doesn't afford me time to do so.
Right. Well, I mean, part of it is knowing that play is a lot of things and it's not just going on a ski vacation or, going fishing or whatever play is to you. So, yeah, sometimes we don't have time to take all the time off to do those things. So, play can be little, smaller activities. Play can also be mindset or the way that you approach the world. So, it can be just being a playful person. And being a playful person can be the way that you think about things, your outlook on the world, using jokes and humor. Like do the same schedule every day, work your 18 jobs, but just approach it with a playful mindset and humor. And that's bringing play into it. The other thing is I think our culture with, like, the work ethic and capitalism makes us overly busy and tells us we're not good enough or successful enough unless we're doing X, Y, and Z, and so I think sometimes we take on too much and, sometimes we have to live a life and afford a house and kids and all that. But sometimes I think we're doing things we don't have to do. And so we can look at that and get rid of some of the things that we're feeling like we should do, but we don't really have to do. And then replace some of that with play. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but that's one of the reasons why I started researching play and doing playful pedagogy was because it's like teaching was not fun for me. I was getting so drained by it. So then I'm like, I'm just going to make it playful. And then I just started bringing in play and games and jokes, but play's not always fun and games, which is another part of it. But I think it's just, you can keep your same schedule, but then bring in different things to do and mindsets to approach it with.
Yeah, that's helpful when you talk about it as a mindset. Because when I think about that for myself, I feel like I'm a reasonably playful person. Like I enjoy laughing. And I think as a mindset, that makes a lot of sense. For some reason, it feels like the way society talks about play, it's like you were saying earlier, it's like that ski vacation. It has to be like some huge thing that you're doing, and that's real play, you know? Okay, I have to ask you about this, and then I want to get into play therapy. But you said this, and I just can't let it go. You said play is protest, and I was like, okay, now you're speaking my language. Can you talk just a little bit about how play might function as a form of protest?
Yeah, so, I mean, protest is when it interrupts what's normalized, right? And so I think in our culture, what's normal is work hard, achieve, be serious, be quote unquote professional, which I hate that term for so many reasons. But that's what's normalized. And play is considered childish and a waste of time. And so if you play as an adult, if you play in the workplace, then it interrupts the norms of adulthood. And so play questions the rules. It breaks logic. It kind of flips things on its head, does things a different way. Play allows us to restory what's possible and basically create alternative worlds. And the thing I love about play is sometimes in protest, opposing injustice, it's like criticism of something, breaking something down. But in order to actually be subversive, we have to like create something new.
Mm.
And so play does that. Like it doesn't just oppose injustice or it doesn't just negate normalized things. It embodies joy and equity and community and kind of like gives a structure to that change.
Okay, I think you've just convinced me to play more in like 3 minutes when you were just saying that. Thinking about play as protest. I'm also thinking of Miriam Kaba's work, and she talks about, abolition as like a million little tiny projects, experiments that we take up, and thinking about play as being potentially one of those projects or experiments that we take up. Gosh, I feel like so often in the world of advocacy, in the world of protest, in the world of abolition, et cetera, it's always seen as serious work. Certainly, it is serious work, but it can also be playful work. And being subversive, at its best, to me, being subversive is a playful act. Like the people I know who are best at subverting dominant systems tend to be really playful. They tend to have like a bit of a trickster, maybe more than a bit of, but a large amount of trickster in them. So this has been really helpful for me because I think it's really reframing how we think about play. And it's kind of sad how I think we take that word for granted. Like it is just seen as childish. And like you said, there could be a part of play that gets us in touch with our childlike selves, which is beautiful and lovely, and we probably need some of that. And also, play can be so much more. Just while I'm thinking of it, because I may forget at the end, I just want to ask you if people are before we get into play therapy, if people are interested in reading some more about some of your work around play or the study you did, any of this kind of stuff, can you point them in a certain direction where they maybe can read more about this?
I think a lot of it is I mean, if you just Google my name and then University of Colorado, Denver, I think they have my Vita on my faculty page. There's a lot of that in there, but if you go to www.professorsatplay.org, that's the Professors at Play website, and it's called a playography. It's a lot of the work that we've done there, so there's some of that there. I think those are some of the bigger places, and then some of my publications are on that website too.
I will say that I read very recently in the last month or two a book that you contributed to around AI and play as well, which I found really captivating. So there's lots of, and it was free. Like you can just that's what I like about a lot of the books that you've done is that they're free and people can just download them. So I just want to put that out there too. But the AI one I found really interesting as someone who's been a little slow to AI and skeptical of it. It made me look at this in new ways. So do check that out, everyone. All right. I want to transition into play therapy. So I think most therapists have heard of play therapy, but like I was saying at the start, I'm not sure a lot of us know what that actually is, even though we know it's out there, but we just think, oh, you're just playing with kids in sandboxes or something. Can I start just by asking a really general question? What is play therapy, at least as you've come to understand it?
Yeah, so kids don't have the cognitive ability to talk about their problems most of the time like adults do, and adults don't either sometimes, by the way. So, in the therapy world, we have talk therapy, and that doesn't really work for kids. It's not that effective, and so play therapy was created to use play as the mode of therapy for kids, and so play is the natural language of kids, and so if you think of play as the language and the toys as the words, it's a projective method, and so they're projecting their inner world onto the toys. That itself is therapeutic. So the play itself is therapeutic when they're projecting onto the toys. They're processing through what they're struggling with, they're desensitizing themselves to their pain and trauma, and also, when they're projecting onto the toys, they're communicating to me what is wrong. And so they can't a lot of times don't have the words for that, but through the play, I can see what it is that might be bothering them. And then that informs my approach and my response to them. And then it also helps me communicate to parents to work with the system to kind of see how the system can adjust to support the child.
Okay, so here's a wondering I have. Like, how much, and I suppose this is different. So I understand this could exist on a spectrum, but how much do play therapists actually intervene? And do you plan the play out ahead of time? Like, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, or does the kid just sort of do whatever they want? I mean, how does this actually start to look?
Well, there's a whole bunch of different play therapy approaches, and they all exist. I kind of envision them on a continuum from non directive to directive. And so there's a lot of different ways you could do it. I use what's called non directive child centered play therapy. And so I am not directing the child, I'm not planning the play, trusting the child's innate ability to know what to do in the play to work through what they need to work through. But then there are some more directive approaches, that are teaching the kids skills and, communication and coping skills, and if there's a problem the parents bring in, then the therapist will directly talk about that problem. So, there's different ways to do it. I just prefer and start with the non-directive approach, and based on the kids' issue, their age, their developmental level, their abilities, their interests, it can adjust a little bit, but mostly I use the non-directive approach.
May I ask you why you gravitate towards non-directive rather than a more directive approach?
Well, I first of all, I work with little ones, and so I think, like, 3 to 7 is kind of the ones I prefer to work with, and so with those kids, the non-directive approach is really more important and I think beneficial because they really don't have the language, but play therapy is technically for kids 3 to 12, and so if you're getting to the 9 to 12-year-old age, they're more likely not gonna be playing a story out with toys, they might be doing more games or activities or arts and crafts or something. So it'll change a little bit, but I just it's like a personal philosophy of mine. I just really believe in the power of play, and I believe in this child-centered stance that the kid has what they have within them and knows what they need to do in order to grow and heal. And I just believe that everything the kid does in the playroom is purposeful and meaningful. And so if they have that direction within them, then if I intervene and do something directive based on what the parents think the kid should work on, then I might be sending the kid a hurtful message of like, you're not good enough as you are, or you need to change to be approved of or accepted. So, yeah, I think it's more just like a personal philosophy that leads me more towards that non-directive approach. And I've seen it work in action. And I don't know, once you see it work, you can believe in it more so.
And I wanna get into that a little later on, the ways in which you've seen it work. But can I push you a little bit at hey, I'll be transparent. I tend to lean in general more towards the direction you're leaning. So just in how I think about people, young people included. So I'll acknowledge that. But I could imagine people being skeptical of what you just said. They're like, okay, you're just trusting this kid. So you're just showing up and the kid sort of takes the lead and everything is going to be projected onto the play. Like, come on. How do you know that that's actually what's transpiring and that this is actually working?
How do I know that the play is actually working?
Yeah, or how do you even know that this is actually what's happening, that they're actually projecting this onto the play? Like, this is something I've heard other therapists talk about. I think when they're skeptical of play therapy is not the fact that it can't be therapeutic at all for kids to play, but more so that like the interpretations that are made or the projections that are made, like, well, how do you know these things are actually quote unquote true?
Mhm. Yeah, I get that. I think if you haven't been trained in play therapy, I think it's easy to think that. Before I was trained and I was starting to get trained, I thought there was a list of, like, symbols and meanings, and, I heard one is, like, if a kid gravitates towards a snake a lot, then that's a sign of sexual abuse.
Right. I've heard that one too.
And so that's when I started, I'm like, "Hey, where's the list of things?" But, I mean, there's patterns and things that you can look for, and it's all looking at metaphors and symbolism, and so, that can come into play, but we're not making these or we're not making these conclusions just from thin air or, like, this list of symbols that mean something. So knowing that the kids' language is play, and I know that I trust that everything they do in the room is meaningful and purposeful and going in a direction that they need to work through what they need to. I know they're trying to communicate to me, and I'm watching their play, but I'm watching their play through the lens of an understanding of context. And so, what I do personally is I meet with just the parents on the very first session for an intake. And this is important because, one, I have to start building rapport with the parents because so much of working with the kid is working with the system. And sometimes what I find out from the kid is hard for the parents to hear. And so that first session, I'm building rapport, and so later when I need to help them adjust things at home, we have that rapport. But in that first session, I'm asking a ton of questions about the kid's background and the family and the dynamics and experiences they've had. So then when I'm watching the play, I have all that information to kind of decode the play. And so if I don't have that information, I really have no sense of what's happening in the play. So, it's not like out of thin air. I have some context as a lens, and then I'm not just jumping to conclusions right away. So, as they're playing, I will watch their body language. I will watch what they're doing. I'll watch what they're playing with, how they're playing with it, the tone they use, the emotions they share. So I'm gathering all this data with my observations. And through the lens of the context of what I know with the parents, I can start to kind of make some hypotheses about what it could be that they're communicating to me. And then, so I have like 10 hypotheses. Over 5 sessions, 8 sessions, 10 sessions, those initial hypotheses have been narrowed down to a few because the kid keeps repeating the same thing over and over and over to confirm that one hypothesis. So, yeah, we are making some interpretations, but it's informed by context and history with the kid and looking for themes and patterns. So it's more sophisticated than I think sometimes people think at first blush.
Yeah, boy, that explains it really nicely. So it's first of all, the like list. I think that's what I wanted in that one play therapy practice in my head. I wanted the like definitive list that just told me what stuff meant. I never found it. And I appreciate what you're saying there because it's like, okay, these hypotheses don't come out of thin air. They come through gathering data, conversations with parents. And then I really liked what you said where you, hey, I have 10 hypotheses or whatever it is, whatever the number is. And then it's like, okay, some of these are going to be ruled out as we go along, right? And so actually, it seems like a very careful process as you're talking about it, and one that's informed by data with what's going on with the child, with what's going on in the system, et cetera. Now, you brought up parents. I've heard a number of therapists over the years say, like, well, I want to work with kids. I just don't want to work with the parents. And of course, doing play therapy, you do spend most of your time in a session with just the child, but you do have to work with the parents, right? I mean, in various different ways. I feel like one, it could be a tough sell. Like, okay, this kid's going to come in and just play with you for an hour. Now, I'm starting to understand through my conversations with you, it's much more than just that, of course. But to the parent, it may just look like they're coming in and playing in a sandbox or doing whatever they're doing. And you have to gather all this data and it takes time and all of this stuff. And it seems like it requires a lot of patience to be able to progress forward because I don't think through what you're saying, I don't think it's like in 3 sessions, you're like, oh, I've confirmed the hypothesis and here's what we do. This can take a number of sessions. So I'm wondering about, I guess, twofold. One, how you cultivate patience in this process, and two, how parents are part of this process.
Yeah. So let's start with parents. So how parents are a part of the process. Like I said, I have the initial intake with so first of all, this is how I do it. There's a lot of different play therapy approaches. Sometimes parents are in the room, there's family play therapy, all this stuff. So I'm just describing my approach. I work with parents in that initial session, build rapport, gather context. And then I tell them I do non-directive child-centered play therapy, and sometimes I'll adjust based on the kid's needs, and I'll explain what that is. I'll explain what it looks like. I'll explain the process. There's phases to it, and I'll let them know that it's not a direct approach to working with a specific problem. It's kind of an indirect way, and there's research on non-directive child-centered play therapy that says about 20 sessions is kind of the sweet spot.
Hmm.
So I'll let parents know this is not a quick thing. And I had one parent actually recently say, "We just want a handful of sessions to do this or that." And I'm like, "Hey, I might not be the right person for you because this is the approach I use." There are people who do less play therapy approaches with less sessions, but yeah, so I just believe in this child-centered philosophy and that the kids have what it is within them that they need to work through what they need to work through, and it just takes some time. So I'll tell parents the first phase, and we'll talk about phases here in a bit, I think, but
Yeah.
the first phase is building rapport in a relationship. And so the kid's not generally, sometimes there's been exceptions to this, but most likely the kid's not going to come into the room and session one start playing out their therapeutic content. They need to feel safe in the room. They need to trust me. They need to know that I'm a person that they can show this to and I'll still accept them. So I let parents know we will be doing parent consultations, and so I'll meet with the parents, just me and them, and I'll let them know the themes I'm seeing, the patterns that are coming up. I'll communicate to them. I look for, like, the kids' internalized narrative. basically like belief about self, others, in the world. So I'll communicate that to parents and kind of brainstorm ideas about how they can disconfirm that at home. And so we'll meet depending on the kid, the situation, the context, usually once a month I'll meet with parents, but it's after like that first phase of relationship building, which can take 5, 8 sessions. So I'll let parents know that, and it kind of helps them be prepared to be patient. And some of them are, and some of them are still like, what's happening? What goals are being met? Because they're paying each week, and I get that. Um, but yeah, there's like I have to be patient in the process, but then I have to also help the parents understand that patience, and sometimes they get it and sometimes it's hard.
Yeah, I can really appreciate that. Can you take us inside when maybe a parent is going like I mean, maybe they don't always say this directly, although sometimes they might, like, "Okay, dude, I've paid for 5 sessions," or whatever the number is so far, and they're like, what are the results?" I mean, that's the kind of world we live in, right? This sort of neoliberal, like, capitalist world where it's like, "I'm paying for a service, you're rendering a service and I have to see the outcome." And like, I'm wondering how you manage those kinds of situations where they're almost like demanding that they see some sort of outcome for their money.
Yeah, I have that happen a lot actually just recently. A kid started with me and it was probably like session 3, and in the waiting room after the session, the mom was like, can we schedule a parent consultation? Because we want to know like what's going on and what goals are being met." And I'm like, "Sure, I'll email you." And then I just in the email, I let them know, Remember the first phase is relationship building, and so we can meet. I'm happy to chat with you, but just to let you know, like, there hasn't been a lot of therapeutic content quite yet because 'cause we're still working on the therapeutic relationship. Although, at that point, I'm still collecting data about what I called the internalized narrative, so, like, belief about self, others, in the world. So, I have some sense of that in those early stages, so I can communicate that to parents, but yeah, I don't blame them. It's expensive and taking time each week to come, but they'll often do that, and I'll just reiterate, like, the process and the power of play, and I'll give examples, like, sometimes the kid will go home and they'll be like, "How is play therapy?" And they're like, "Great, we played Bop It." And the parent's like, "You played Bop It for 50 minutes and I paid for that?" So I'll have to, like, tell the parents what the kid played and how I'm reading that and listening to that through the lens of play therapy and what that means. Because play always has meaning, but to people who aren't trained or people who don't value play, they just see it as frivolous and a waste of time. So I'll kinda communicate to parents what's happening and the meaning behind it and the purpose behind it, and that usually helps.
Okay, I definitely you're bringing up like the first phase. I definitely want to get into these phases that you're talking about. I just want to say one more thing about like the parents in this because I feel like often parents might almost kind of drop off a kid, it's like a broken appliance or something that you're taking somewhere or your car's down and you're like, "Hey, here's this thing, fix it." How long is it going to take to fix? And I'm wondering, like, do you see that sort of thing where parents are, and I'm not saying parents are doing this in a mean spirited way, but usually if, a child's coming to see you, there's probably some significant struggle, maybe at home or in school or whatever it is. I mean, how do you resist that sort of idea that here's this child that's broken and you're supposed to fix it in short order?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it comes from that child-centered philosophy that, like, who this child is right here, right now is okay. Um, and it's kinda seems weird, but, something that child-centered therapists repeat to themselves in their head is, "I wish for this child to be no different in this moment than they are right now." And so then when you have parents coming in like, "Fix this kid," I s I hear that, and I understand, I have kids myself, and sometimes the behaviors are really hard to deal with, and I'm already stressed out from life and work and all the things. So, yeah, sometimes I want people to fix my kids' behavior too, so I get it. But in my play therapist lens, I can understand that, the behavior is not the problem. The behavior is a symptom of a problem. And so it's kind of like it seems counterintuitive, but I kind of ignore the behavioral problems and I'm trying to listen for the actual problem that's causing the symptom, which is the behavioral problem, if that makes sense. And so I'll listen to what the parents want, and then I'll take my child-centered, non-directive philosophy, um, know that, the kid is just showing up how they're showing up based on their lived experiences, so there's really nothing wrong with them.
So I appreciated your reflection there as a parent because I feel like, one, I just feel like it's very real and honest. And all of us that are therapists and also parents, like, it's funny 'cause I don't work with young children like you do, but I work with a lot of people who are parents, and they'll think that I have all this shit figured out, you know? Like, "Oh, well, you must be, like, an amazing," whatever it is in life. "You must be an amazing partner, you must be an amazing parent, you must be," and it's like, "No, actually, when I'm in it, I struggle just as much as you struggle," which they often find surprising, so I appreciate that reflection. It felt very real. Is it okay if I steer us now into talking about phases?
Yeah.
Because you keep bringing up this, you're saying like in phase one, and actually you use these phases, you're saying to like help parents understand kind of what the structure is. So can you bring us up to speed on like what these phases are and what they might look like?
Yeah, so in play therapy, generally the phases are the first phase is kind of rapport building, and that's helping the kid feel safe in the environment, be able to trust the therapist. Then once they feel like they have some trust and safety, then they will start doing some boundary testing. And so basically they're probing for safety. So they have an initial sense of safety with the therapist in the room and they're like, "Okay, but I do you are you really safe?" So they're going to start like throwing sand around the room or throwing stuff at me or knocking stuff off the
Wait,
wall.
hold on. Throwing stuff at you? Are you
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah. All sorts of things.
They throw stuff at you.
Yeah, sand on my head, all the things.
What do you do? Sorry, I do want to hear the phases, but can I pause you here for a minute?
Uh,
Do you just stand there and they throw it at you, or they like, what do you do?
well, okay, so this is this might get onto a tangent here, but
I started it, it's my fault, but I wanna know, like, these are the insights I wanna hear about, seriously, like, I can't ima I'm just being honest, I can't imagine being in the room and the kid's pouring sand and you just take it, or, like, what do you do?
okay, so there's different therapists, there's different beliefs about this, and sometimes it depends on your approach if you're directive, non-directive. So my stance, like I said, is non-directive child-centered play therapy. So my stance in the room is I'm warm, I'm reassuring, I provide unconditional positive regard. I promote a feeling of permissiveness. And so I let them kind of do basically whatever they want. Not whatever, I'll give you an example here in a minute, but
'Kay.
I have a deep respect for their ability to make choices, to direct themselves, to heal, and so I try not to say, "Don't do that, stop," or direct them in some way. I don't rush the therapy, I don't tell the kid what to do, and so I only establish limits when necessary. And so I'll just let you know, one of my weaknesses as a therapist is I'm a little too permissive sometimes. And like being permissive is good, but you have to have this boundary. And then sometimes I'm, still too permissive. So it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, you can see it in my eyes. I understand there probably isn't a specific moment or specific limit that you can recognize, but how do you begin to know that you're being too permissive?
Well, I think for me, it's so they're going to start testing your limits. And I let it go. I will set a limit, but I realize I'm being too permissive is when they keep doing it over and over and over and over. So I let them do it and I'm permissive because a part of it is they're testing me to see if I'm safe and I'll still accept them if they behave in these ways. So I'm permissive and unconditional to let them know that I still accept them. And then at some point, they're really asking for boundaries and safety. And so that's been a hard thing for me to try to kind of find that point. Sometimes I find it too late. But your other question was, what do you do if they're putting sand in your hair?
Yeah, yeah, or they're throwing things at you,
Yeah.
like, as someone who works with although I have worked with adolescents before where something's been thrown at me, but it feels very different than what you're describing as a part of working with young children in play therapy, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So, first of all, you can see the look in their eyes. And when they're throwing stuff at me and putting sand in my hair, they've got a playful look in their eyes or like an exploratory look in their eyes. They're trying to play with me. They're trying to test my limits. They're trying to test my boundaries. They're trying to see if I will still accept them if they do these things. So, it has a purpose. If a child started coming at me with rage in their eyes and, like, I don't know, scissors or a pencil and, like, coming at me, that would be very different, but I've never had that happen in play therapy, so it's a different kind of experience.
That's super helpful. No, that like, what you just described, for whatever reason, I mean, you can analyze me for why I had this picture, but I had the picture of them being sort of, like, more aggressive or coming at you in that way, and it sounds like more often what you're experiencing is not that. It's almost like it's almost like a curious act or something when they're pushing these boundaries. It's not an act that feels hostile, but it's like a curiosity, almost like, can I do this? Like, how's she gonna react sort of thing?
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's play, they're being playful, sometimes it's curious, sometimes they're trying to test my limits and see if I'm still safe, and sometimes it's about gaining power and control, which is something they need, and so I'm not gonna stop them, like, if that's what they need in the play, if it's reasonable. There's some times where I have to set limits, and every play therapist should have some idea of, like, your personal boundaries and limits to things. And when that gets crossed, then there's a skill that we have called limit setting. And so if they cross a boundary, then we have to limit set. And so, like, there's only one rule in my playroom, and it's the sand has to stay in the sand tray because the sand is like $300. And it's just like really nice sand. And I just am really protective over it. So that's my one rule. But other therapists, like, I got handcuffed behind my back the other day by a kid. I know one therapist who will not allow that. She'll let them handcuff her in front of her, but not behind her. I don't let kids draw on the walls or other kids' artwork. They can't put glue on the floor or in the sand. One girl tried to spit in my sandbox the other day. I set a limit on that. So there's certain things that I'll set a limit on, but otherwise I just let them do what they need to do to push my boundaries because in that second phase, I want them to really know that they can trust me and that I'll still accept them even if I see the worst, quote unquote, worst parts of them.
I really appreciate your vulnerability in answering that and also acknowledging some of the ways, like your relative weaknesses that you see as a therapist. Thanks for diving into that with me. So, you had phase one, you told us about building connection and relationship. You're kind of in phase two, which you're talking about, which is this kind of boundary
Mhm.
testing. Anything else you want to say on that before you go on to the other phases?
Yeah, I think, one thing that's kinda weird is I tell my students when I'm teaching them, I actually really love when kids start pushing my boundaries and testing the limits. It's really hard in session because it's a lot to manage and you have to figure out the limit setting. It's like a formula you have to do, and it's kind of wordy, and so you have to, like, be ready for it. Because if they're gonna draw on the wall, you gotta be ready with it. So it's kind of a lot of work, but I really like it because it tells me that they trust me, and they're doing one last attempt to make sure I'm trustworthy before they open up. So usually after they do that boundary testing, then the next session or whenever they're done with the boundary testing is when they get into the therapeutic content. So I really like that stage of it. And I'll let parents know. One parent was in the room with us because their son wouldn't separate from her at first, and she was seeing all this boundary testing, and she's like, "So and so, stop it." And I had to, like, tell her this, this is actually not in front of the kid, but I was like, "This is a good thing, just let him do this, here's why he's doing it."
That's
Um
something I'm struck by, Lisa, is that especially as a parent, is how different this tends to unfold in the therapy room as you're describing it from a parent and understandable, like as parents, we can't just let our kids, throw stuff at us and all that kind of stuff. But I'm wondering if that's even a part of what might be therapeutic about this whole process is that it's very different than the normal sort of parent-child hierarchy that exists and maybe necessarily exists, but still it's very different.
Yeah, exactly. Play gives kids power and control, and They can try on roles that they're not allowed to. They can have anger in the room, and at home, they're told not to be angry. And they need like, anger has a message that comes with it. There's a purpose to anger, and so if we just try to diffuse anger, we're not really helping them heal what they need to heal. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of freedom in play therapy that they can test that and work through what they need to. So, yeah, there's the first phase, building a relationship and trust. And then once they have the trust, then they start testing just to make sure one last time, probing for safety. And then once I pass that test is when they open up and start playing the therapeutic content. And so I'll know because their play, and we can get into the specifics of this here in a bit, but their play changes to be more like narrative, more storytelling at that point. And then this phase that I kinda added, the play therapy phases are, 4 phases, the last one being closure and termination and kind of.
So sorry, let's make sure, in case people are interested in kind of following along here. The first one is building connection relationship. The second one is this testing boundaries. What's the third one?
This is the opening up to therapeutic content.
And is there a fourth one?
Yeah, so the play therapy literature I've read, there's a 4th one, which is kind of like closure, termination, solidifying skills or stuff that they've learned. I think there's a place for that too. I've added in my mind, I've added another one after the therapeutic content and exposure of the inner world. And it kind of comes from, I use narrative therapy lens in my play therapy along with non-directive, child-centered, and so it kinda comes from that lens, but I see the 3rd phase where they're bringing in the therapeutic content and exposing their inner world onto the toys as this storytelling process with danger and unpredictability and all this stuff, and so the 4th phase that I see is when the play starts to shift and change into, like, little cracks in the story of cracks of power, cracks of agency, kind of signs that the kid is becoming their own hero. So I kinda see that as the 4th phase, and then I think of the 5th phase as this closure, termination, kinda carrying this new narrative forward.
Okay, I'm really interested in a lot of this. You just mentioned cracks and you said cracks in the story. What I'm wondering is, in general, what cracks are we talking about? Like, are these good cracks? Are they not so good cracks? I want to understand the cracks in the story that you referenced. As a narrative therapist, sorry, but I can't let that one pass without asking.
Yeah. No, they're good cracks, wonderful cracks. So, in the different phases, I'm kind of looking for different narratives or stories, little bits and pieces of that. And so I'm looking for one is like, I think of it as like the implied or internalized story. So I think in narrative, I've heard of it as like the dominant discourse or the master narrative, those kinds of things. That's one story that I'm looking for. And that can kids can communicate that to me in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's through their play, sometimes it's through the things they say, sometimes it's through their body language. But this story to me is their belief about themselves, others, and the world. And so it's kind of this master narrative like, I'm annoying, nobody wants to be my friend. Like
Mm.
that's a narrative that I'm listening for. And so a crack in that story throughout their play, I would start to hear an alternative story to that. Like, "Oh, so and so wanted to be my friend. A lot of people came to my birthday party this weekend." So I'll listen for that and kind of highlight that. And then some of the other stories that I listen for that usually come out more in that 3rd phase where they're kind of bringing the therapeutic content in and projecting their inner world onto the toys is I don't really know how I call it, like, the embodied story or, the problematic narrative, problem saturated story, however we wanna word it. I still don't know how to like, in my head, I know what it is, but with words, I don't know how to explain it. So I'll just call it embodied stories, but these are after the kid has tested me and they feel safe, then they're gonna start projecting onto the toys and it's gonna be this story, this narrative with coherent storyline. There's gonna be a setting, there's characters, there's a plot line, there's context, there's danger, there's a sequence that happens. And so I'm listening for this story. And then as they play, each session, generally, not always, but generally they're gonna start playing that same story over and over and over for session after session. And then eventually there's a crack in the story. If like there's danger and unpredictability and no one's there to save them, then eventually like the hero comes and shows up, and that's a crack in the story where there's some agency.
That's making total sense. Yes, thank you. And again, this is feeling like it takes a lot of patience because you're saying like the sort of more dominant story, the master narrative, which often is situating the kid as problematic in some way, having trouble connecting with the world, whatever it is. Like those, you said those play out over and over and over again. So, I could imagine as a therapist sitting there and being like, starting to feel hopeless myself. Like the kid just keeps playing out the same story about how awful they are or whatever it is in their play. But then you said at a certain point it shifts, and I'm wondering about that point, like the inflection point is have you noticed any sort of themes there that like how you I guess like how do you get to that point? Do you just wait it out and then it shifts, or is there something you do to help make that shift happen? That piece, that inflection point seems critical because without it, I'm thinking, well, the kid just keeps playing out this play about how problematic they are, right? So it seems like the inflection point is key for the therapeutic outcome to happen. How the heck do you get to that place? Is it just patience or are there questions you're asking? How do you get there?
I mean, it's a lot of patience and a belief in the power and therapeutic power of play, and a belief in the child's innate ability to know what they need to do to work through what they need to. And it's hard. Sometimes if it's session after session after session, I mean, even now, sometimes I'm like, "Am I just playing with this kid? Is this even therapeutic? What's happening? I don't know what's happening. Is this wasting the parents' money?" So I will still have these times of self-doubt and doubt in the process. But when I have that thought, then I go, trust the process, trust the kid, trust the power of play. And then I just follow it. And sometimes I can get a little more directive if it's an older kid or something, but with the younger kids, I just, like, really try to stay non-directive. So, yeah, I stick with it, and then there's skills that you learn as a play therapist, and, limit setting was one that I described, tracking is another one. You're basically narrating what the kid is doing. It helps them feel really important and seen and, like, what they're doing matters. Basically, like, reflections of feeling, reflections of content, I might so in play therapy, you don't wanna ask questions, or in non-directive, I'll say, you don't wanna ask questions because it creates a power differential where the kid feels like they have to answer a question because 'cause you're an adult, an authority figure. So, I try not to ask questions, but I will make wonder statements, like, "I wonder how the dragon feels when so and so does that," and then I leave it. And sometimes kids answer and sometimes they don't, and if they don't, I just keep watching their play. Um, so I'll do that, and then, sometimes there's a whisper technique, so if you do wanna ask a question, you whisper it, and the point is it's supposed to make it gentler and reduce the power differential, and so it just doesn't feel as domineering, I think, and it works pretty well. So sometimes I'll ask questions, very rarely, but I'll make wondering statements. My comments will be geared towards the play that I think is relevant for them. So if I think their master narrative is nobody likes me and no one wants to be my friend, I'm annoying. If I see that playing out in the play, then I'll make a special comment about that thing. And I'll say, "Oh, it seems like Bunny thinks people don't like her. I wonder how that feels." So you'll make comments based on the narrative that help them internalize things, that helps gives them words for their experience. They're playing it out because they can't say the words, and so when I reflect what I'm seeing with words, it helps them integrate it and make more sense of it and put words to the story. And so I think something about that process helps them work through it, and then again, play itself is therapeutic. So eventually, if I'm patient and using the play therapy core skills and the relationship is strong, eventually there'll start to be these little cracks in the narrative. And sometimes they're really small, subtle shifts that I don't even pick up in the moment. But every once in a while, I'll read over my case notes because I take really detailed case notes because it's play. And so I might be missing something if I don't record all of it. And I'll read over my case notes and I'll see it. I'll see the crack in my case notes, but I didn't see it in the room. So sometimes it's really subtle, sometimes it's a bigger shift, but that's a really big moment when a kid's play has been the same session after session and then it shifts. that's a huge thing because it shows they're making some internal shifts as well.
I have 2 more questions. I know we're pushing up near the end of our time. And one of them is just if you have any, like, other additional examples, and I'll get to that one in a minute. But with what you were just saying, is this like as you've seen it play out, is this largely an unconscious process for the kid? Like, you make these wondering statements, for example, and the kid's going through the play and they're replicating sort of how whatever issues they're up against in their lives, and then all of a sudden it starts to shift or whatever in the play. Does that then, like, unconsciously shift in some way to the kid's life? Is it more conscious? Like, I'm wondering how it goes from the playroom into their life.
So it depends on the age. If it's the older age group, then there tends to be a little more cognitive back and forth, and you can kind of talk about things more logically. But I work primarily with the little ones, and it does seem to be more of a subconscious thing where they don't know what they're playing out. They don't know why. They just think they're having fun and playing. I don't think they notice the little cracks in the story, the shifts where they show agency and they become the hero in their own story. And I don't think they understand how that shifts inside of them. They just start feeling different about themselves and they start acting different at home. So in the room, when I see a shift in the narrative, that's usually when I hear parents saying, I don't know what you're doing in there, but so and so is doing this differently, or so and so seems more confident lately. And it's just wild. Every time there's that shift in the play, I usually get that feedback from parents. So I don't think kids realize that it's happening.
Yeah, see, that's really interesting. That takes us almost full circle because at the beginning you were saying, like, when I was talking about how it takes patience and all that kind of stuff, and you were like, yeah, but once you do it, you sort of start to believe in the power of it. And I think that story just shared that, right? That example where it's like it's almost uncanny in some ways. The parents are like, "Wow, I don't know like, even they're sort of confused by it, but they're like, something's happening in there," right? And then you can sorta notice how that coincides with what you're seeing in the play, which is, pretty remarkable.
Mhm.
Alright, now let me ask you this before we wrap up. You gave some examples, on boundary testing, like people throwing things at your dome and dropping sand on you and all these things, and, um I'm wondering about, the sort of what did you call it? The stage 3, the therapeutic content part, and then about becoming the hero of their own story. Are there I mean, you talked about some of the I don't know if they're techniques, but, like, processes that you use. Are there any examples you have of that, that you can think of?
Yeah. It's interesting how I want to write a book about this one day, like describing the different processes or different ways that kids play things out because it's always different. But one I'm thinking of is I had a kid, he was probably 8, and his parents brought him in. He had a lot of really traumatic things happen. Um, I'll be general with it for privacy reasons, but there was like um, a carjacking that his dad was involved in, and then there was, like, a shooting across from his school, and then he got, like, yelled at by, this person on the street, like, a lot of different things happening where there was just this, like, intense fear and not feeling safe in the world. So they brought him in, and he had so much anxiety that he wouldn't talk at school. He was 8, and he wouldn't talk at school. And for 10 sessions, he wouldn't say one word with me, barely played anything, just really scared, like, tears would kinda roll down his cheek because he was, like, so scared of just, being himself in a room with me. So, they brought him in, and then after finally it took a long some kids, the initial phase takes 2 sessions, sometimes it takes 10, 15. With him, it took probably 10 or 15. And then he finally warmed up to the space and warmed up to me, and so then he started playing this sand tray where he was bringing in his therapeutic content and exposing his inner world onto it, and it was like this narrative story, and it's not, like, clear. So at first, it's like he plays in the sand for 5 minutes, and it's, this walrus and this shark are fighting each other, and then he gets this fish and buries it under the sand, and it dies, and then that was it. And then, like, the next session is similar. There's battle scenes and fighting, and then this time there's like snakes there and it's dangerous, and then there's these other dangerous animals. And then all the sea animals get brought off the shelf, and he buries each one in the sand with their head in the sand first, and they all suffocated and died. So it's like this, you can start to see this narrative being played out of danger and fear and loss and aggression and abandonment and helplessness.
So that's just so we're sort of on the same page here with what we've been talking about. That's the therapeutic content, right? So this would be like phase 3. So you already went through the limit testing part that he said took 10 sessions or whatever it took. And now that's the therapeutic content part that you start seeing come out. And now that's like sort of the master narrative that's in there too somewhere, maybe about the it's like mass death or some, I mean, his world sort of feels unsafe. And so now then does it shift into that kind of fourth, that becoming the hero of their own story?
Yeah, eventually. So yeah, this danger scenario with battle scenes and all this played out for a while, and a lot of like symbolism and metaphors in there. And then eventually the first like crack in the story I saw was one of the sand trays was the same danger battlefield. But then he went and got this little moose. It's like half an inch, maybe an inch little figurine. And he brought it in and he said it was a small but mighty moose. And it was going to come and save all the characters and bring them all back to life. And so I was like, ah, there's that crack in the story. There's some agency. Um, and
And that's
so,
that was the first time you had seen something like that. Ever it was
yeah,
just all the characters dying or whatever.
yeah. The
Yes.
first several
That's pretty telling. Yeah, the crack.
Yeah, so the first several sand trays, there was no saving anyone, there was no bringing people back to life, so then this moose comes, and, you said, "What do you say? What questions do you ask?" or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
So I said, I reflected on the bravery of the moose, even though he was small, and he was saving everybody, and I said, "So, who protects the moose?" And he said, "Nobody protects the moose. The moose didn't have anybody to protect him when he was young, so he just learned to be brave and survive on his own." So, you can see that this is like a important turning point, but still he's, on his own. He feels like he has to protect people, but he's kinda defenseless. So, it's kind of a small crack in the story, but it's not a resolution yet,
Right.
if that makes sense?
Makes total sense. So then does in this particular story does a resolution start to emerge?
Yeah, I mean, it's always different. The one that was interesting about this kid is he was playing this out for a while, and the moose was the character in the play for a while that was kind of this active agency. And then there was this one sanctuary where he had this family of lions, and the mom was missing, and so he was looking for the mom lion over and over. He couldn't find the mom lion, and sometimes a beautiful thing about play therapy is I'm not telling them what to do or how much to do. And so if it gets too much and too overwhelming, they can stop and that's their choice and I go with it. So he's looking for the mom, and he just got so overwhelmed and he left the sand tray. There's a couch behind the sand tray. He went back to the couch. He's 8, so this kind of seemed unique for an 8-year-old. He put his head on the couch, his knees were on the ground, and his arms were dangling by his side, and he just collapsed
Oh boy.
and just was done playing for that day, and so it kind of felt like this I can't do this on my own. I can't fight this danger on my own. This is too much for me as a small child in this world. And he was missing his mom and he just collapsed. So that was the end of that session. And then right after that session, he started playing out like this collective resilience in the sand trays. So there was still a lot of dangerous animals, but then there was fewer fighting scenes, there were fewer battle scenes, and so he said there's less needs for heroes because there's less fighting.
And
And
that's what he said?
yeah.
Holy cow.
And then some characters were fighting, and he said, "They're fighting, but they're not mad. They're just trying to protect their family. So it's not a bad guy." So you can see it's like bad guy versus good guy and fighting and danger. And now it's like there's a purpose to this fighting because it's protection. And then he got out like the lion family again, and there was a shark that entered the water, and they all jumped on the shark and killed the shark as a group. And then the ant, they all wanted the shark meat as food, so the ant went against everyone and stole all the shark meat for herself, and so then the rest of the family, like, got her and took the shark meat back, so they were still, like, fighting as a team. So, yeah, you can see this, like, collective resilience that comes where he, as a small child, as the small moose, no longer has to do it himself. So that was a huge moment. And then the very last sand tray, like, oh my gosh, it was so powerful. He drew a line down the sand with his finger, and then he put a fence down the middle, and he put the safe animals on the other side, like the family, and on the other side, there were no dangerous animals. And he said that the moose is looking at the other side because he's gonna see what scary things there are. And so he put a parrot on the fence and an eagle on the fence, and those are kind of like lookouts and protections and kind of can see what's happening from up high. Um, and then all of a sudden, some dangerous animals came on the other side, and all the animals were scared, and the babies hid beside their parents, and some buried into the sand for protection. And then one of the dangerous animals, he got it and tried to make it jump over the fence to get the safe animals, and it hit an invisible force field and fell back and died on impact. And so he created this whole story, and so I wondered, I said, "I wonder how the invisible force field got there," and the client said, "It's always been there, the peaceful creatures just didn't know it." And so it was like this, you could just see through those sand trays, like, I don't feel safe. This is really scary, it's unpredictable, and then, like, I have some agency in myself, but gosh, I can't do it alone, and then this collective sense, and then, they were safe all along. So that's one of my favorite examples of kind of that process.
Sorry, I know we're near the end, but I have to ask one more follow-up here. So something you were saying as you were walking us through the phases was like, when they start to become the hero of their own story, often then the parents start reporting like, "Hey, whatever the challenges are that they were up against seem like they're getting better." Did this happen, as far as you can remember with this kiddo as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's never like that perfect
Yeah,
story.
sure.
Oh, everything's perfect, but mostly that happens.
You can
And
see but they can begin to see a shift maybe? The parents can
yeah.
see something moving?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not like, "Oh, everything's solved, it's perfect," but sometimes it's like, "Oh, he's now sleeping in his room by himself, and before he had to sleep in our room." So it'll be a little shift like that. But yeah, I think that was actually the shift at that time. He literally could not sleep in his room by himself, and so he was able to.
You say a little shift. I mean, in a home that could actually I mean, to people without kids listening to that, they might go, "Who cares?" But if you have kids and you hear that, you might be like, "That might be bigger than it sounds," the kid sleeping in his own bed. Um, yeah, and I appreciate what you just said is rarely is it like everything's better now, right? That's not how this work tends to work, whether it's play therapy or other sorts of therapy. But there are these moments where things start to shift. And what I'm finding really remarkable about what you're sharing today is the way that shifts in the child's conscious living life tend to happen as shifts in the play are happening. And again, it doesn't make everything better. It's not all resolved, but just that those two things seem to be correlated is pretty remarkable. And generally, you're saying you tend to see that correlation.
Yeah, generally. And sometimes parents will say, I have one right now, they're like, "Well, she's not afraid of the garage anymore, but now she's afraid of this other thing." So sometimes it'll shift around a little bit, but just seeing that movement is helpful. But yeah, I think because the play is projective, what they're showing in the play is how they feel on the inside. And so when the play shifts, that's a sign to me that they're starting to shift on the inside of how they feel about their own sense of safety and power and agency and control and all that.
Sorry, I have one more question, so I keep lying, but I just have one more. Um, in this world of sort of manualized treatments, are people to listen to those phases and assume that every kid always goes through those phases in a very linear fashion? Do you ever see exceptions to that? I already see how it can be different from kid to kid. Like the play is different, the stories you're making meaning of could be very different. So that's very much not manualized. But I just mean the phases. Like, do you ever see kids go through those phases in not that order?
Yeah, sometimes it's really foggy, and I can't understand when they're moving from one phase to another. It's really, like, clumped together. And other times, like the Santry I just explained, his phases were very clear and distinct, and they went in that order. I'm working with this one girl right now that session 1 came in and just therapeutic content all over the place, like storyline, characters, danger, all this stuff, like very clear related to what she's working through in her life. And then she did that for 3 sessions, and then she did the, boundary testing.
Oh, interesting.
Like, "What? This you already opened up? What are you doing testing me now?" So, yeah, sometimes it's not clear cut, sometimes it's not in a logical order, sometimes they go forward and then backwards and, retest and all that, so it's messy, but I like that because it gives some sense of structure and framework for therapists to have a lens of what they're looking for, but, yeah, it's not always that way.
No, I really appreciate that. And boy, does it give a structure and a lens. Like I told you at the beginning, and this was no lie, I really had no idea how like I had a play therapy practicum when I was a master's student, and I think it was non-directive based on what you're saying because I was basically told like, oh, just let the kid take the lead and show unconditional positive regard, do all that Rogerian stuff. But boy, if I would have had something like you just described, oh, would that have been helpful? So I think you should go forward and write this book you're talking about because I'm sure there are other therapists out there, who are learning how to do play therapy or think they're learning how to do play therapy and they don't really have a model or a sense of how to do this. And I really appreciate the part that you added, and not just because I'm narrative, so of course I'd be biased in that direction, but outside of the narrative part, the becoming the hero of their own story feels like a crucial part. Like if all they did was the therapeutic content, but they couldn't shift out of that problematic story, dominant story, then it feels like I don't know. Like I'd question whether that shift would actually start happening. So I really appreciate what you added as well. But I so appreciate what you've shared, actually walking us through these phases. I have no doubt this will be helpful for people trying to make sense of how they might do play therapy. In closing, if someone's listening to this and they're interested and they're like, hey, I want to learn more about this, or I want to become trained as a play therapist or whatever, or I want to read more about things, like, do you have any suggestions of where you would tell them to turn?
Yeah, so if they just type in A for PT, like the letter 4, Association for Play Therapy. There's a website and it has trainings listed on there. There's virtual trainings, there's in-person trainings, there's university approved courses, and then there's play therapy credentials. And so you can say you're a play therapist without the play therapy credential. I would not recommend it because it's so confusing and messy. Before I had the credential, I had no idea what I was doing. So I recommend it, but there's registered play therapist credential, and then the next level up is registered play therapist supervisor. And on their website, there's, the training requirements. So there's some workshop training requirement, and then practice with kids, supervised practice with kids. So it's all there, but I don't know, play therapy is cool. I really love it. It's like magic, and I think for me, it's a good balance working with adults too, just getting to have a totally different perspective, but it's amazing.
Your passion for it really comes through as we're listening to you today. Thanks for taking the time. I know I kept you a few minutes past what I said I would, but that's the sign of a good conversation. I couldn't help but ask a few more questions. So thanks for sticking with us. We really appreciate your time, Lisa.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome.